We found a statue of a woman down by the river, Part 2, The Great Scam Pan. About an hour after my dad's and aunt's freak out over the photo, Uncle Leith came over and took Lou and me to get takeaway. Dad had locked himself in his room and I could hear his harsh, scared breathing behind the door. I'd eavesdropped on Auntie Andy on the phone. "I'm trying not to have a meltdown, Leith," she had said. "Please can you come over and take the girls out for a bit? I need to calm down and then I need to calm Sky down and then I need to work out what the hell's going on. I don't want the girls to see me like this." Growing up, I always looked down my nose at Uncle Leith. There was this helplessness about him. Unlike Auntie Andy and my dad, Uncle Leith didn't work, just lived off the money from the book. His hair was messy, he didn't shave. He smelled of cigarette smoke, booze and weed and he just looked grubby and unwashed. There was always this dazed look in his eyes, like he was in a perpetual state of shock. In hindsight, I think I judged him too hard. He picked us up in his lemon of a car and we drove in silence to get burgers and chips. "You wanna go play in the playground?" he murmured. He was worse than usual, his eyes completely glazed over and boggling, mouth hanging half open, moving like he was in slow motion. "We're a bit old for it now," I said. Uncle Leith just nodded, picking at his food. "What's wrong with Mum and Uncle Sky?" asked Lou in a tiny voice. Lou was always quiet with her dad, barely saying a word compared to her usual chatterbox self. I think she was a bit embarrassed and didn't know how to react to him. It's too hard to explain," said Uncle Leith. Then he reached into the glove box and passed us both a book each. I recognized it as the one he'd written with Auntie Andy. I was an avid reader but I'd never been interested in my family's book. I'd never read a memoir before, more interested in fiction and science. It was a very slim little paperback and the title read, The Great Scam Pan. On the front was a picture I recognized from Greek mythology of the god Pan, with the upper half of a man and the lower half of a goat. On the back I saw a black and white photo of Aunt Andy and Uncle Leith looking very young and very serious. "Just read it and you'll get it," said Uncle Leith. He drove us back home and let us out. Lou and I walked nervously inside the house. Aunt Andy looked up from the couch with a beer can in her hand. Dad was curled up on his armchair, sucking on his knuckles. "Sorry for scaring you girls," she said. "Did Leith explain?" I just showed the book to her. She nodded. "It's better said in there," she said. "We did have editors making it sound good and all that." She finished off the beer, crushing the can in the hand. Lou and I went to our bedrooms. I opened the book up. In the back was a few photos. Some were from the newspapers and showed Andy, Leith and Sky looking very young and frightened, huddled up together. The headlines said stuff like "Survivors of Secret Cult and Terrorized Children Speak Out." The next photo was of the golden statue we'd found in the river standing in the middle of a clean, white sterile-looking laboratory, with a few people gathered around her with notepads and mysterious machinery. One of the photos was of Auntie Andy in a hospital bed with Uncle Leith awkwardly carrying a newborn Lou like she was a sack of flour. The last photo was of my dad, on the porch seat out back. Sticking out of the top of his jumper was a little dark-haired toddler. He was reading me a book. I remember as a kid, constantly being carried around by Dad in his coat or jumper. He was always reluctant to put me down. My first memory was being somewhere warm and cozy and looking up to see big dark brown eyes peering down at me. It felt strange to see the memory in photo form. I don't remember Dad reading me the book, but I do remember feeling safe and comfortable. I opened up the book and began to read. While Leith, formerly known as just Leaf, and I were writing this book, my father Liam Arcadia, formerly Liam Paulson, was found not guilty of ritualistic murder. Everyone else in his little cult went on the stand to defend him, and it was the word of a bunch of kids versus dozens of adults. According to them, all we young people just committed mass suicide for no reason. I must admit a lot of our story sounds batshit insane, yet the authorities actually had Rose Gold in their possession for a long time before she went missing, so she's not a lie. I'm going to skip a lot of the minor details of my early life. I know everyone just wants to know how it all went down, how the secret cult fell apart, the sequence of events that led to us escaping it all. My father Liam founded the community in the late 60s. It's a common story. A lot of cults start this way. He ran a spiritual class, then the power got to his head and he ran off with a dozen members to hide out in the forest away from society. The community was pretty much just Liam taking bits from pagan religions and the free love movement and warping them to his liking. We worshipped Pan, focusing on the fact he was the god of the wild and music and was linked with sex and fertility. A life of emulating Pan was pretty enticing, and Liam gathered up a huge group of people wanting to dance, drink and screw all night and day. A lot of pagans honor a mother and father goddess and god. It can really be whoever you like, whoever you feel an affinity to. It can be from Celtic, Greek, Norse, Egyptian or any other mythology that speaks to you. To worship your god or goddess of choice, you prayed and gave offerings to them. The horror films tell you all pagans want to sacrifice people as offerings to their hell god. In reality, most offerings are just nice wine, flowers, pretty trinkets, artwork or anything you'd think the god or goddess would enjoy. On the surface, our secret community looked like a hell of a lot of fun. Worshipping Pan meant it was just non-stop party. What a great way to live, right? You didn't have to dig very deep to discover we were actually a fucked up mess. We were the first generation to have been born and raised in the community. Older siblings had been brought along by their parents who were the first members. Among the little kids and teenagers, it was honestly hard to keep up with who belonged to what father. There was so much sex. Our mothers just had no idea. You see Liam's badly thought out utopia quickly falling apart. We had been raised to believe getting crushes was a taboo, because people our own age might be a sibling. Us girls shouldn't get a crush on an older man cause he might be our dad. There was always a secret fear of accidental incest about the community. We would never have lasted very long because we would have absolutely ended up interbreeding and then dying off from it. My mother had my brother Sky with a different father. The adults gossiped about how Liam had started getting problems performing as he got older, which meant we didn't have any other siblings. Sky being slow and me being ugly, it was called incredibly ironic that we were the only safe bets among the teenagers. The whole community, although it preached free love, was whiter than snow. I only met people who weren't white after I left. We still found a way to discriminate on appearance though. See, Liam was blonde, so all the blondes in the community felt superior to the brunettes. I know, we didn't even have redheads. The girls tended to buy into the whole blonde versus brunette rubbish more than the boys. Not saying the boys didn't bully each other, but it just wasn't over hair color. They were more likely to pick on Sky cause he was a bit slow, or make fun of me for being ugly and worm-ridden. Being an isolated community, we tried to avoid doctors as much as possible. I'd suffered from worms all through my childhood, and because it had gone untreated for so long I was pretty malnourished as a result. Now I'm blonde, but I'd had the worms and also had an overbite and was wall-eyed, so I was still an outcast. Juniper, or Jupiter as she was called growing up, was the biggest outcast out of us as she was overweight and brunette. The three other brunettes, Ren or Gwen as she secretly called herself, Fern and Hazel, had made a little group and looked down on the rest of us. I'd rather be with them, but even though I was an outcast I was still blonde and an enemy in their eyes. So our father god was Pan and our mother goddess was Rose Gold. No one paid much attention to Rose Gold. We thought she was a bit of a weird quirk of Liam's. He told us the story of how he'd found a golden statue in our valley and believed it was special enough to worship. To all of us, it just looked like a grotty-looking sculpture of a woman with a veil over her eyes. It stood in the middle of the marshy area around the river. Despite everything I'm going to tell you, I didn't ever get an evil vibe off Rose Gold. She made us all nervous. that's for sure. No one liked to be alone with her. It was a common dare to go stand by her in the middle of the night, and no one lasted long doing that, running back after 10 minutes at most. After I left this community, an investigator explained what Rose Gold was like to him. She was like when you went into one of those Christian or Catholic churches all by yourself and looked at the God's mom statue, Mother Mary or whatever. It was just eerie being around her, like she was somehow alive and watching. That's a good word. Rose Gold didn't feel evil or malicious, just very eerie. The community was based in a clearing down in the valley. There were jute and hemp fields that we made fabrics out of for our clothes, bedding and tents. We grew fruit trees, kept a few goats for milk and cheese and chickens for eggs, had a veggie garden and grew wheat to make basic breads. We didn't eat meat, and when I left I found it was one of the biggest culture shocks learning most people ate animals. I still find the thought of eating a living creature absolutely bizarre. To me it would be like eating a hunk of human flesh. But to each their own. I just wasn't raised that way. So we followed the wheel of the year, which meant we had a celebration nearly every season. This all happened around the spring equinox celebration called Ustra. We'd embroider rabbits onto our clothes and have egg-based meals, them having to do with fertility and all that. Really, it was an excuse to party and drink, just with nicer food to eat and better clothes to wear. So every year at Ostra we had a little opening ritual that I found out later Liam had completely made up himself. We bustled around the podium in our best outfits, white tunics for the men and white dresses for the women, all with the rabbit embroidery on the sleeves and hems. Liam took the stage. He was dressed in brown robes with a horned headband in his blonde hair, emulating the god Pan. He was carrying a crochet blanket in his hands that was covering something. We all bustled forward closer. Liam looked around us, letting the suspense build. Then he whipped the blanket away. Underneath was a little effigy of Rose Gold. At the base of the statue was a panel that said, "No and go." "No Kothpo?" said Liam as he held the effigy above his head. "Or go Kothpo?" I always thought this opening ritual a waste of time. Why couldn't we go straight to the food and dancing? Still, I joined in the chanting of, "No Kothpo, no Kothpo, no Kothpo." The odd opening ritual was the only time we ever did anything to do with Rose Gold. Every time the word no would glow more brightly, everyone would cheer and start the party. We were all struck into a dead silence as for the first time in my life, the word go glowed more brightly. Liam saw our faces and lowered the effigy, staring at it, mouth hanging open. All of us kids exchanged confused glances. The grown-ups looked absolutely horrified. "When's the party starting?" one of the little kids said, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "I'm hungry, Mama." Finally, Liam cleared his throat, looking over at us. "Rose Gold has spoken," he said, his voice hoarse. "Go Kothpo." As we set up the cushions and table for the food, there was a somber energy in the air that I'd never experienced at a seasonal celebration before. All of the kids were looking at each other with utter confusion as we sat cross-legged on the cushions. Liam took his place at the head of the table. "Let us commence the morning feast," he said. Then he reached for his first piece of bread. After he'd taken a sip of wine and a bite of bread, we all started to eat as well. There was no chatter or joking around like other years. The adults were either dead quiet or whispering worriedly behind their hands at each other. "He only invented the Kothpo to get rid of Carter," I heard one of the grown-ups whisper at the dinner table. "This is bullshit. I didn't sign up to be murdered. I thought this was supposed to be fun." One woman touted and shook her head. "You did sign up for this," she said. "We all did. Nothing in life is easy. We barely do a thing for Rose Gold, and you can't even do this one thing for her." At the head of the table, Liam nodded. "The Kothpo isn't just mindless cruelty," he called across at us. "We are a community of pleasure, which means we're constantly growing. If we get too big, we won't be sustainable and collapse. This is a very unpleasant sacrifice. But that's what life is all about. Would you rather sacrifice your freedom to love and be one with nature and to connect your souls with others, or sacrifice just a few of us to keep our community strong and safe? All of us kids were growing more uneasy as we slowly realized what the Kothpo was. None of us had signed up for this. We'd been born into the community. We had to do whatever our parents did. Now at the end of the morning feast, we shall pick an age group at random to participate in the Kothpo, said Liam. As the 30s through to 40s participated in the first Kothpo, they will have immunity from this one. Teenagers through to 20s and 50s through to 60s shall be in the running to participate this year. Whoever isn't chosen is guaranteed to participate in the third Kothpo, and then we'll reset again for the fourth. If you are 12 and under or 70 and over, you are exempt from the Kothpo. When he saw our drawn, frightened faces, he raised his wine glass. 3 men and 3 women will emerge victorious, he said. Their prize for surviving will be the opportunity to share in a love session with the great god Pan himself. He said it like it was a good thing we should be excited about. Everyone knew that whenever we were blessed with a meeting from Pan, it was really just Liam wearing a goat leg costume. Sharing a love session with Pan pretty much just mean having an orgy with Liam. You're probably thinking, wait, the prize is a romp with Pan, but teenagers were a part of the Kothpo. Was Liam going to sleep with underage kids? The answer was unfortunately yes. 13 and over you were free game to the grown-ups. We didn't think anything of it. We were a bit grossed out but accepting. I was never preyed upon, but others in my age range definitely were. It was just normal to us though. If you'd have told us it's wrong and messed up that adults want to have sex with you, we'd have been gobsmacked. We'd been raised to think this was just how life was. I saw the whispering grown-ups ahead of me exchange looks, raising their eyebrows. One whispered, "It's gonna be the young ones, of course." Finally he gets another chance with Polly. I looked at Sky across the table, stirring his cup of iced tea. Who was Polly and Carter, you might be wondering? They were Sky's parents. Apparently Liam was infatuated with Polly and had created the Kothpo just to get rid of Carter. Carter had just turned 30 and Polly and Liam were both 29 when the first Kothpo happened. The 30s through to 40s were drawn. After Carter had died, Liam quickly swooped on Polly, who fell pregnant with me and then died while giving birth. Sky had suffered some mysterious trauma when he turned 13. For a few years he refused to speak and would cry hysterically. Sky, who was a splitting image of his mother that Liam was obsessed with. No one said anything, but we all had a good idea about what might have happened to Sky. None of the adults had ever explained to us what the Kothpo even was until now. Maybe if they had, there'd have been more runaways. I think it was Leith who figured out that Liam had just squashed the term "control the population" into something short and snappy. Liam tried to have us believe rose gold chose our fate, but this wasn't the cursed rose gold statue. It was just an imitation. He'd created a little rose gold effigy and it was solar powered. It lay in the sun all year. Then when he took it out and flicked a switch, either No or Go would have absorbed the most energy and glow the strongest. After the feast was over, Liam picked up the effigy again. Will the 50s through to 60s know or go the Kothpo? He asked. We all stared as he put the effigy up above his head. We all watched as the word "no" glowed out. There was a harsh exhale from the entire community. Rose Gold has spoken, he said. The 50s through to 60s will not go the Kothpo. Therefore the teens through to 20s will go the Kothpo. The grown-ups all reacted at once, some bursting into tears, others reaching to hug us young people who were just staring around, completely baffled. Just imagine every year of your childhood your Easter celebration was a great time full of food and fun you greatly looked forward to. Then out of nowhere one year your family tells you instead of a celebration they're gonna send you to death instead. It was like a bizarre dream. All of the little kids were getting increasingly upset and confused. The sadness of the adults seemed melodramatic and put on. The little kids, however, were genuine. I don't want 'em to die. A lot of them were crying to their mothers, burying their faces in their mother's dresses. "Why can't they stay? It's not fair. I hate Rose Gold." Their mothers hushed them nervously. "Now we shall prepare for the funeral march," said Liam. "This is time for everyone to say their goodbyes. Then at 3 in the morning the men shall take the raft to the river and the women will go to Rose Gold for the dance. The survivors will shoot a flare to signal the end of the Kothpo and go to the clearing of love for their prize." The goodbyes were just mainly made up of mothers hugging their shell-shocked children who were standing around uselessly, not knowing what the hell to do. The next few hours were a blur and 3 o'clock crept up fast and deadly. We were herded like sheep to the edge of the forest. Some of the adults grabbed their instruments, normally used for a big dance, and sing along. This time they began to play mournful music, like we did when people died. Others grabbed what we used as a table, raising it up above their heads. They walked it over to the boys who took a hold of it. I realized if you flipped it over, it could be used as a raft. There were 10 girls and young women who were a part of the dance. Myself, Daffodil, Belladonna, Juniper, Wisteria, Hazel, Winter, Briar, Wren and Fern. The 8 boys and young men going down the river were Leaf, Sky, Morris, Robin, Rowan, Glenn, Blaze and Forrest. Belladonna and Glenn were the oldest and expecting a baby. Wisteria and Blaze were the youngest, only 13 years old. Don't worry about remembering any of their names. As you might have gathered, you won't have to memorize most of them. I suggest you don't get too attached to anyone either. Liam put his hands up to the sky. Then he cried out, "Let the Kotopo begin." I was distracted from my reading by a commotion in the lounge room. I put down the book. Outside the window, I saw that the day was turning into evening, the sky darkening into navy. I went into the corridor and peered into the lounge room. There was movement beside me and I turned to see Lou peering over my shoulder. "Who the fuck is out there?" Andy hissed, staring out of a crack in the curtains. On the armchair, my dad was curled up with his head buried in his arms, trembling. Lou and I tried to peer through one of the windows. Andy spotted us and glowered. "Get back to your rooms," she said, frantically waving her hand at us. We couldn't see anything in the wilds of the garden. My heart was in my throat. Was Rose Gold somewhere in the darkness, waiting for us? I imagined the statue rising from the mud of the riverbank, floating down the walking path towards our house. Or would her legs move in unnatural spasms, creaking and squeaking as she made her way towards us? Then Lou beside me let out a sharp gasp, grabbing onto my arm. I looked over at where she was staring. In the window I could see a figure. Not the veiled golden face, but an old man with long white hair and a yellow-toothed smile. When Andy saw him, all the color drained from her face. Then she bounded over, sweeping Lou and I up and shepherding us towards the armchair which she stood over, protectively shielding us and her brother from view. "Fuck off!" she screamed at the old man. "Get the fuck out of here." My dad burst into a fresh wave of tears. The old man kept staring at us with his sharp blue eyes. "That's no way to talk to her father, Dandelion," he said, and then cocked his head to the side. "Hello Sky. Is that Eloise and Francis too? I've heard about them in your book but I've never had the pleasure of meeting them." Andy grabbed her phone. "Get away from my family or I'm calling the cops." Liam from the book. What was he doing here? After 13 years, why had he come here now? The old man's smile fell away and he stared at us with an unsettling hungry expression. "It's funny," he said. "I had a dream that Rose Gold led me to my daughter's store. This was meant to be, Dandelion. We were meant to be reunited. You can't fight fate." Andy started tapping in the number to the cops. Liam moved quickly away from the window, running off and away into the night with startling speed. "Why would Rose Gold bring him here?" Andy said in a small voice after she'd gotten off the phone with the police. My dad slowly peered up from his arms, staring at Lou and me with his big brown eyes. "You made wishes," he said to us. After a few moments, Lou and I nodded. Andy let out a long rattling breath. "Monkey's paw," said Dad.